that is most human, that ache of presence and of looking back. Here it comes, that tenderness and hope. Somewhere I read it counted 60 beans to make his coffee. I grind my careless handful and see him walk the outskirts of Vienna in search of pastorals. Impossible to speak of one who lived without the platitudes. A person should take music lessons if for no reason than these opportunities for tenderness. It is all a matter of hands. Out of the mournful sweetness of touch comes love. I shouldn't have betrayed you. Adagio ma non troppo, after Beethoven's String Quartet in E flat major, Opus 127, a poem from our guest tonight, Lesley Valdes' book of poems, Starlight Room. Good evening and welcome to Philly Loves Poetry. My name is Charles Carr. Philly Loves Poetry is a collaboration between the Moonstone Arts Center of Philadelphia and PhillyCam. The purpose of our program is to give our audience the experience of the rich culture of poetry in the Philadelphia area. So tonight we have a very talented, multi-talented, I would say, guest poet, Lesley Valdes. Lesley, a classically trained pianist, comes to poetry following a career in arts journalism. As classical music critic for the Philadelphia Inquirer and for other national publications and media. Lesley lives in Philadelphia, where she is on the faculty of the Fleischer Art Memorial and instructor of piano and ardent guest speaker for the Philadelphia Chamber Music Society. This is her debut collection, The Starlight Room. So welcome, Lesley.
Thank you so much, Charles.
So there's so much in this collection, and I think I told you when we were talking about it in advance. It's only a 35-page chapbook, but you cover so much in this book, and it's funny when I was reading, before the second reading of the book, which I try to do for all of my guests. I was watching one of the nightly talk shows, and Yo-Yo Ma was a guest. And the host said to Yo-Yo Ma, "What is music?" And he was very kind of slow, but very, very attentive to want to answer it. And he says, "It's energy." And as I read on in this, and I kept thinking of energy in your book, and I said, energy. And let me apply this as I'm reading along, because I always think of energy in the conversion of energy to something,
The transformation.
right? Transformation. And so this book covers so much. And when I say a transformation, not only does it have to do, of course, with music and pieces of music, but it has to do with your life as, with your family and with, certain friends, and also the landscape of where you grew up in Florida. And so can you talk about that? I mean, I think in advance we talked a little about that conversion process and how you went about in this very small collection of using that energy, using that transformation of all these things that are part of you into this book of poems.
Well, I might have told you before, this 35 pages was probably 55. And the more I looked at it and revised it, I kept thinking it's going to fall flat if it's so long. And I guess I have a short attention span. And I don't like to read big, fat books. And I just felt I had to strip it down to the things that mattered the most to me, and take it from being I have this tendency of overpopulating my poems. I remember a mentor telling me once, I thought, I've got to get rid of some of these people poems in my family and so forth. Um, in a way, it's going to sound rather abstract, but I thought that I wanted the book to have a sense of music to it, not music and notes, but a sense of the way I like to hear music, how I like things to start quietly and build up and then sort of come back down. And so I was thinking of the shape of the poems, how to put them together, but I honestly wasn't thinking. I had no idea till quite often after I put it together, how it was, say, haunted by music and haunted by my father, my family, because I have a family, they're mostly in music. And I never thought about energy, but I remember feeling very strongly that these things have to move. And if you don't have movement in music or in your writing, it's not really going to make you have emotion, feel. So I was thinking about that, but basically so many things that we do, I think, are unconscious, and then people find the patterns or
Right.
the repetition.
Well, I think that's the greatness of a book. Like I can say I picked up something from Yo-Yo Ma, and I wanted to read it in kind of the aftermath of thinking about that. And I think that's what should be great. There's no fixed way of approaching a book of poems. You
Right.
have to like one thing I know when I look back on it, how you open the book with, is it Cluestown?
Closeton, where the sugar cane.
Yes. And so and I was thinking of almost like a play. That you start there. That's the opening scene for this book. And that I think that was a very interesting choice.
I'm really happy because when I was showing it to some friends, they said, "This really isn't your best poem, and it's so quiet. Why do you want it to start?" And I thought, I'm not sure why. I'm totally not sure why, except that it's small, and I thought it was quiet. But the strange thing is that after I put the book together, and I didn't think it was going to be haunted by my father, who was a pianist. The first poem has the word, well, trespassing. My mother,
Yeah.
and the title poem is basically dealing with my dad's trespass, or the affair. But I absolutely had no idea. It was totally not intentional. It was just true that he liked to trespass, going places, and the sign might say no trespassing, and he wanted to show us the orange groves and the sugar cane.
Yeah, I thought it was masterful that you opened with that. It's almost, if you want to see a book of poems like really staged, I mean, how many plays have you have seen that started with something rather simple, and it kind of has this energy that grows out, from it, and that's what I saw, and how you move in. I think it was maybe first four poems are more personal, and then eventually we come into we
Sure.
meet we meet Lesley, the musician, and we meet that tremendous knowledge and love of classical music. But and I thought that was really great because we see you and we see your roots really as we move through this collection. The other thing that I wanted to know more about is just the title.
Oh, so the Starlight Room is a real place, and I think I've told you or friends, I first felt, oh no, this is too sentimental, the title. But as a child, my brother and I were taken in and out of the Miami Beach hotels where my dad was a band leader. And the Castaways was really fun, but the Doral Hotel, the top room is, well, they call it the Starlight Roof, but the ceiling of the Starlight Room is all these tiny, tiny little lights. And it does feel like you're outside with the starlight and the moon over Miami. And I don't know why. It's just a childhood fixation that I hadn't even thought about till I was, in my 60s.
Right.
So I decided to keep it. And
I,
we
you know,
just know why we do things.
as I was saying to you, after I understood that, and after I read the poem, I said, I'm kind of picturing Lesley standing or sitting on stage, and she's really, sharing this whole collection with us in that place, in that place. And your father was a musician. What kind of music?
So he played pretty much everything. He played everything except classical. He wanted to, he said, but when you think of like Peter Dushan and those like Society, he played. I mean, he was Latin, Sergio Valdez, so he played all of the Latin music, the Cuban music, but he played show tunes. He could play anything. He could play by ear. But when I was taking a lot of his music home after he died, there would be the soundtrack for Camelot and the way, what was it, The Way We Were, all these movie themes and Exodus. So he would have this sheet music, and then he'd be looking at it, and then he'd do his own arrangements. And so I grew up hearing, what's it, not Cabaret, all of the movies of the 60s and the 70s,
Wow.
all of those things or feelings. He played everything. And so he mostly had a trio. He could play double bass, a lot of different things, but predominantly he was a pianist. So it was glamorous as a kid going to hear your dad on these stages. Although I think at the time we didn't think it was so glamorous.
Huh.
But in a way it is. You see your dad on stage and people are clapping, and
Huh.
it was very.
That's
It was
wonderful.
lovely.
Wonderful. The other thing I always like when I approach books of poems is I get an education.
Me too.
I get an education not only, about, what the poet is, life is, and what their interest is, but it's also new language. It's also things that I really don't necessarily know about. So when I was reading your book, and I just marked these down, some of the things, and the Bandoneon,
Oh, Bandoneon?
Opera Andamar, Musica Calada, Dicta Liebe, Philip Wu, Codebet, I don't know, Beethoven's String Quartet in E flat, Adagio, I just read that poem, Monotropo, Schubert's Winterreise, Sonata in B flat major, the term fermata, and then kind of at the end of the book, flamboyant tree. Now, I've never seen a flamboyant tree, so it forced me to go on Google. So, can you talk about some of those, those
terms.
Yeah.
I think those musical terms, which are usually in Italian, really turn people off, because it's like shop talk.
Uh-huh.
Except that when you're learning music or playing the piano, it's like they're right there in your face all the time, and it's another language. And so they just become sort of part and parcel of your neighbor. The way that when we talk about poetry, there's some words that are really, I think, off-putting, like enjambment and ekphrasis, and things like that I don't know if it's necessary for us to really know the term, because when we see it, when we're writing, we're doing it.
Right.
But Italian is such a beautiful language,
Yes.
and it sounds so lovely that I think Adagio Monotropo sounds better than slow, but not too slow.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so glad that you picked it out, because if you've been studying music since you were, 5 or 6, We just know what fermata is, but most people don't know that a fermata is a very long pause,
Uh-huh.
or that legato is, like Nabokov said, only connect. Legato is absolutely connecting note to note in the most beautiful way you can do it. I was wondering, when I used some of these legato fermata as titles for the poem, if people would feel they had to look it up.
Well, I think that's good.
Yeah,
I think, that's, for me, that's really good because I'm learning something, that, I don't confront every day. And even the other thing I was, here you have this very rich background as a classically trained musician with all these composers, all these pieces of music, and how you kind of compress it down into certain poems like Schumann and Schubert, and of course Beethoven, and others. How did you go about doing that?
I wasn't thinking about these I wasn't thinking I'm going to write a poem about Schumann or Schubert, or maybe the Schubert in a sense, but it was always that there was either an image or something was said or I heard that, for example, the poem that deals with Schumann, I just read a line that the pianist Jonathan Biss said, which was, everything I've learned about myself, I've learned from playing Schumann. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And I know when I was a teenager, my most favorite composer was Schumann, and my daughter and I, we both really love Schumann. But then it just kind of kept going in my head about, wow, he felt that way about Schumann, and I love him so much, and what is it about it? And when you're playing Schumann, he uses the middle registers more than many composers do.
Right.
It's very much the center, the middle range, and I don't know, the poem just started to come from that, and then I was thinking about my daughter and I who love Schumann, and we'd gone to a concert together and we heard these pianists, and one of them irritated me and the other one didn't. The one who spoke about Schumann didn't.
Right.
Although it was years later that I read his comment. It wasn't at the time. Anyway, these things just start percolating, and the next thing you know, you don't know where you're going, but something comes out.
So you have had all this training in music and different elements of music. Is there a translation for you of those elements as you write poetry?
Absolutely.
Can you give us kind of insight into that?
I'm not sure. Well, I think I mentioned to you before, Eleanor Wilner, who we all know and love, she told me that her physicist husband told her that poetry and physics had a lot in common, and it was mostly pattern and motion. And that I've never forgotten since she told me that. And so music has this incredible pattern and motion, but every single composer has a different way. It's almost like different fingerprints, different handprints, different patterns he uses. And when you start really loving a composer or loving a poet, you start trying to figure out, what is it about them? What makes Schubert Schubert? And, what makes Merwin Merwin? Or, and you start looking really closely at, I think, what we're reading, except that when you're doing it, we're not really thinking it through, are we? I mean, we're just spilling it out and then revising and deleting. And someone said, if you know where your poem is going, it's probably not going to be a poem, because you want to make a discovery. But I guess these are composers that I've always loved, and most pianists or clarinetists, whatever, we have these favorites, I mean, if I could only have 3 composers in my life, it would have to be Bach and Chopin, and I'm not sure if it would be Schubert and Scarlatti, but you have these favorites, and something just comes out.
Now you live in, the selections that are in your poem, you live in those pieces. Like, your discussion of Winter, I don't know.
So the Winter Journey.
Yeah, and that, and here is and when that took place in the life of that composer. Can you talk about that? Why you picked that particular?
It's like very strange. This is considered the most important song cycle in probably the German or Viennese literature. It's two books based on a poet whose name I've forgotten, and it's like extraordinary sense of Schubert wrote 600 songs, including these 48, and I hadn't really I didn't really know it. And then I started listening to it and I thought, oh my gosh, this is really, it's profound and it's touching, but it's very simple. It just touches you. And for some reason, I was going through a divorce, living in Philly, and it was my birthday on the first day of spring. And I heard that Fischer Dieskau was singing the Winterizer, and I had never heard it in person.
Mm-hmm.
So I took the train up to New York to hear Winterizer, and it's just a goosebump piece. I mean, it's very sorrowful, but it's also beautiful. And then I started reading about Schubert because I never paid attention to him when I was in music school. I thought he was too repetitious. I didn't understand his extended, elongated sense of time. And I read somewhere else that Schubert, in the last weeks of his life, was still reading James Fenimore Cooper.
Yeah.
And that got me going. And so I started looking up Schubert letters to and from Schubert, and I became transfixed about this man. He had horrible mercury treatment. He's in a confined room. He's wanting more books by Fenimore Cooper. He's revising this great winter journey. It was amazing. And he wrote his last 3 piano sonatas in the last few months of his life, when he clearly knew he was dying. And they're just masterpieces. So I guess that's why I just decided now in my 60s, 70s, I'm finding Schubert at last, and I'm finding what I love about Schubert.
Right.
And
Are there other pieces of music that I think when we were meeting, there are other pieces of music that you live in, and maybe they become like themes for where we're at emotionally. I think I talked to you about the famous Barber.
oh, the Samuel Barber,
Yeah,
Adagio
and
for Strings.
yeah, and how I've had I wrote a poem about that, and there's so many times when I'm watching something or something is happening that somehow that piece has come. A very close friend of mine, by the way, his family came from Cuba, and we became friends. And when he passed away, I found out about it. We hadn't seen each other for a while, and I have it on my, in my collection. I started to play it endlessly, and I was just living in that. And there were so many times when I wrote that poem, when I wrote the poem to it, it was me picturing people going off in those cars to the concentration camps, or my father during the First World War, and there's a like a sadness about that piece.
Sorrow.
But I find shelter and I find a place to be in that piece of music. Do you have that sensation
It's
too?
funny. So that Adagio for Strings, that makes me think of Poe saying, "Beauty's tone is sorrow," and something about that piece makes me think of that Matthew Arnold poem, "The Sea is Calm Tonight," and then at the very end, where ignorant armies clash by night, and that poem has to me that feeling that I get when I hear the Adagio for Strings. But all I know is that I wish I had not stopped practicing when all the time I was being, reviewing music and being a music critic, I wasn't really enjoying playing the piano myself. I was intimidated by, all of these incredible artists. And now, sort of at the end of my life, it's all I really want to do is to be able to play more and more music and to read music, because the piano has the most vast literature of any instrument. It's completely vast, and most of the things we hear in concert or on the radio, that just doesn't even touch it.
Right.
So when you have had the privilege of studying music and you can sight read, you can go through a whole bunch of things like you're reading great literature,
Right.
even if you're messing it up.
Mhm.
And that's what I do. I mess up a lot of things, but it's so much pleasure.
You know, you have this wonderful quote that introduces the second section of your book, and I'll read it. And it's very unique. It says, "Music depends on its own diminishing," and that's a quote from Ellen Bryant. Boy, can you expand on that?
I thought it was just striking because music very much depends on silence. Not only it comes out of silence, but it goes into silence at the end. But if you're a wonderful musician, you absolutely have to perfect the silences within a measure or a pause or a fermata, because it simply isn't. It's like with poetry on the page, that white space we have is terribly important in how
Right.
we give people time to digest. But I'd never heard what Ellen wrote. She was a cellist, so she understood. I think she was using it metaphorically because the poem it comes out of had something to do with a family member dying, and she was hearing a cello in her head. But, music dies.
Right.
And sort of, I guess, the energy you were talking about sort of transforms and goes somewhere else.
Yeah, I guess with your, with your background, with your knowledge, and I want to talk to you kind of ending, this segment of our broadcast, talking about your process of writing poems. Because I'm kind of, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I'm kind of seeing you sitting and beginning, and there's music around you. There's music around you. I'm not saying it's classical. It could be.
Yeah, it could be Brazilian samba.
Exactly. Talk about your process of writing
When I went
poetry.
to Warren Wilson and I was in my 60s, that's what my first mentor asked me and someone else. What is your process? And I was like, I have no idea. I have no idea. But it turns out my process, like many poets' process, is associative. I'm definitely not a formalist. I don't think of, I'm going to write a sonnet or a pantoum, or I've never even managed to do a villanelle. It's associative, so there's maybe an image or an anecdote comes to me, and then you just start pressing into this image. Why does this obsess me over and over again?
Right.
Why is this obsessing me? And then you make these associations that sometimes can feel like stream of consciousness, and sometimes are way too wild. But I love that about poetry because we don't have to make these linear, logical transitions, one thing to another thing to another thing. It can be just how some of our minds work, that, this makes me think of that, and you go off on a tangent, and if you go too far, you've totally lost your reader.
Right.
But yeah, so I think it's all of these associations. I don't know, what would you think your process is?
Well, I get a lot of prompts, and I try to take my life as it is and fit it into a prompt.
Oh, okay.
Whatever it is. And sometimes I say the prompt usually has because I've been in a workshop for 18 years, the prompt usually has a couple of poems associated with it. And you sometimes get dragged
You mean
away
like poems from
from,
somebody else's poems?
yes, somebody else's poems.
Okay.
And you feel you're getting dragged away from that.
Uh-huh.
But you have to come back to yourself and you say, well, how does that prompt, represent me right now at my stage of life, whatever it is? And I find that when I'm true to myself, and I might live a very boring life,
doubt it.
when I'm truly, I write better.
When
I
you're
find
honest.
it's honesty, and somebody else might not, fall over it, but
You get,
it's
you know.
me. It's me. I haven't wandered away from it. So I do read a lot of things. I read a lot of things about nature. And for a while, I was reading a lot of things about science because I was fascinated by, you talked about science and poetry.
Isn't that
I
amazing?
told,
It's a
I,
pattern
I,
in motion. I mean,
yeah,
I
I
would never
told you
thought of
about
that.
I told you about a poem I wrote called String Theory,
Yes,
and
I'm
how
shocked.
I boiled it down into baseball. And people say, "Wow, yeah, yeah." You said you did it. So that's my process. Is I take a prompt and I try to fit my current life and situation into it.
Do you create your own prompts, or you take them from a line from some poet or
I
from a
might take it
friend?
from a time, but or I take them out of a workshop,
Mm-hmm.
and I build from there. And it's interesting when you come back, you have like 12 people or how they look at that prompt, and they're very,
Oh, and
very,
they
very
do
different.
such different things. I
Yeah,
know.
exactly,
It's like, yeah, it's true. It's
exactly.
true.
So speaking of prompts, I'd like to prompt you now. We're at that time to take the camera off me
Oh,
and for you to read your wonderful poetry.
okay. So I'll watch the time.
Okay.
Thank you for this. So I thought I will start small and where I come from, which is Florida, not my favorite state. I think I've just adopted Philadelphia, and I would like to read the this Bernstein quote that I opened the book with, which is my favorite. That he says, "It's not about the sharps and the flats. It's about how it makes you feel." Which is what's so important about music and about poetry, because people say, "Oh, I don't really get it. I'm not good at reading poetry. I don't understand it." And it's only how it makes you feel, even if you don't understand every word or every line. How does it make you feel? Um, so the first poem, the small one in the book, is Clewiston, uh, which is where the sugarcane fields are. Clewiston. I saw them again. I thought it was a dream. Then I remembered yesterday at Las Cruces, where I get the avocado and cilantro, and where they never mind the dog. Canes, thick as clenched fists, leaning tall, unraveling as if they've bundled themselves. Father swerving the Chevy off the road to show us how to cut and where to sip. Father ignoring Mother's surge, we're trespassing. Sneaking through the canes, sweeter than the syrup. So that's Clewiston. And here is Miami, if I can find Miami. This is crazy. Page 3, I should have found that. Miami. Houses painted like the inside of fruit. Mango, guava, papaya with beady eyes. Houses with roofs like ski hats low under the dome sky. Casas with lawns like sloppy husbands. Casas gated and manicured where egrets wander, haunted by bromeliads, strange ferns. Casas always with pools, no one in them. City of moonlight, cacophony, decay. Roads named for conquerors and birds. Oh, Miami, medley of voices. Let's go get a cortadito, which, if you know Cuban coffee, the tiny one you get in a cup is a cortadito. I wonder if I can go straight to music and then come back to
It's your
personal is
your
what
time.
always is so kind of embarrassing about poetry, although when I look at all the poets I love, they are personal. It's just that they manage to take the personal to something that is universal or that we all feel. So it doesn't have to be as embarrassing as it can sometimes be. Maybe I'm going to read the Schumann poem and then Schubert. which I wasn't going to read. My daughters are both artists, and the younger one is also a musician. And so Joanna, who loves that she was named for Bach, Joanna and Jennifer are in the book a lot. So this is funny. I want the Schumann poem, and I'm having trouble finding it. That's another thing about poetry is you write something and then you forget that you wrote it. So since I can't find Schumann, let me read the second of the father poems, since the father shows up in Clewiston. And the second father poem is called Listening to Art Tatum. I think about my father. Listening to Art Tatum, I think about my father and those easy arpeggios up and down the keys, the unexpected runs and turns, like Tatum, who turned a keyboard inside out, whose fingers danced. My father's band at the Doral. Mother kept a scrapbook. The lights impersonating starlight in the starlight room. Eighth notes and 30 seconds chuckling across the stage. Dad at the keys, joy spilling. I have a postcard of Duke Ellington rushing somewhere. The tucks, the glee, that smile, so like my father's. Only he never hurried. He never hurried those feathery turns that made me want to rush to save them. Pearls that split too quick their silk. And this is crazy. Like, why can't I find Schumann? So since I can't find Schumann, I'm going to go straight to Schubert. Though this, I call it Finding Schubert because, as I said, for way too long, I didn't understand Schubert. I didn't know what makes him Schubert, which is harmony and an elongated sense of time and moving in a way that things are happening, but you don't think they're going anywhere, but they are. So the first two of these three poems have an epigraph, and the first one is a letter that Schubert, in the last 2 weeks of his life, wrote his best friend. And the letter goes, "Dear Schober, I'm ill. I've eaten nothing for 11 days and drunk nothing. I totter feebly from my chair to my bed and back again. Be so kind, then, as to assist me in this desperate situation by means of literature. Of Cooper, I have read The Mohicans, The Spy, The Pilot, and The Pioneers. If you have anything else of his, I implore you to deposit it with Frau Bonbonnier at the coffee house for me. My brother will most faithfully pass it on to me." And this letter he wrote the 11th of November, 1828, and he died within a week, 2 weeks later. So the poem is, "The songs are on the table, the manuscript, the medicine, the little library his best friend made for him. 19th century Europe couldn't get enough of Fenimore Cooper. The bows and arrows of America, escape, and politics. Delirious he sings, waking checks the proofs of Winterreiser, slash his notes as if by razor, as if the tones were the disease. Mercury, the cure that kills, dementia, paralysis, deformities. Syphilis, the stigma. Death's not the worst thing that can happen, Schubert tells his brother. Delirious he sings, calls out for Beethoven for the last quartet. Into the sick room they bring their strings. It's rude to shake a man visible and claim the results. And still I see him, feverish, enraptured, marking the score that scared his friends, that cost more effort than any before. The rimless glasses, curls curling like the melodies, but no, the illness took them."
You read this line. It's in the third couplet. really. And it slashes notes as if by razor, as if the tones were the disease. That's such a masterful line of
Thank you.
poems.
But you know, you can see this manuscript in New York, and I looked at it online, and it he was crossing out like crazy. Which again, isn't this like writing, like poetry? Um, it's all about rewriting. It's about revising. It's about deleting. And he was taking stuff out.
Okay.
Um,
Well, it's a great way to describe, that process.
ugh. So the second one is again an epigraph, and it's from reminiscences from someone that would have known him but would have been much younger, because it was written 30 years later. Uh, and the epigraph starts, "For some time, Schubert appeared very upset and melancholy. One day he said, 'Come over to Schober's, and I'll sing you a cycle of horrifying songs.' So he sang the entire Winterreise through to us in a voice full of emotion. We were utterly dumbfounded by the mournful, gloomy tone of these songs, and Schobert said that only one, Der Lindenbaum, had appealed to him. To this, Schubert replied, 'I like these songs more than all the rest. Someday you will too.' And the writer was Joseph von Spahn in his reminiscences of 1858. And it's interesting, he liked these more than anything. He wrote 600 songs. So it's beautiful, the manuscript, and messy, his winter journey, battered with revisions. It was my birthday, the first day of spring. I went to hear the songs that frightened him, that frightened his friends. The hall was standing room. A famous baritone sang The Wanderer Who's Lost His Love. Love loves to wander, goes the song. Love turns the weather vane. Why do you listen to such mournful music, you said, before you left? Does it matter who betrayed? Winter can be any season. Under a lime tree, the wanderer's love began, Der Lindenbaum, the song. Ours was non-blooming pear. It's snowing hard beyond the village. The wanderer dreams the hurdy-gurdy man, old, blind, his fingers numb with cold. Der Lehmann plays and no one listens. The wanderer brings his songs. The hall was standing room. Sorrow rippled the hall. And the last one, Sonata in B-flat major, is just totally amazing. His very last of his last three sonatas. And it has an extraordinary repetitive ornament, a trill that's really not an ornamental trill, that comes out so powerfully, 3, 4, 5 times in the first movement. So, Sonata in B-flat major. In the living room, Walter Klein plays the last sonata, that unearthly trill. Beware the ornament that isn't ornamental. The left hand warning, holding joy. Repeat, repeat, each time a deepening. The major key that sounds like minor, that sounds like pain or patience. The summer you returned that we pretended it wasn't over. Too late, we listen. We learn to listen. The CD on the shelf, how many years unopened. So there is Schubert. Well, I still look for Schumann. Isn't this funny?
Take your time. You have time.
Can I read legato?
You can read whatever you
So
want
one
to.
of these many musical terms that can sometimes throw us. My 7-year-old students say I'm a broken record about it. That what do we miss? And they'll say legato. Touch as if you can't let go, the way that lovers hate to leave. Bend what doesn't bend, so the tune curves. Touch, that's the thing, 100 ways. 100 ways. I think I wrote this all the time I was growing up. People would say, oh, he has such a nice touch. And of course, they were thinking in the plural as well as the singular, but it always bothered me because there's so many ways to touch a key. And it makes the difference between a Dino Lipati or an Andras Schiff and another pianist, the way that they can articulate all these subtleties and nuances. So perhaps that's why I did it. I'm not sure. I think I'm going to read something that's like another obsession. This is called At the Good Dog Park. I'm always happy in the dog park. Dogs handle their differences. Sniff from the bottom up. Know that head to head, things can get ugly. But always thrust for dominance, but in their world, even the alphas take turns. Rarely an animal so snarly she's taken out. Energies raced off, erased in packs around the turf. At Schuylkill River Park, always a settling, snouts at the trough. What do I regret? Not knowing my own thirst, not holding my heart's ground. Here are the auscultations. Listen.
So that's an interesting word that.
Yes.
So can you
I'm not
explain
sure I could even pronounce it.
the oscillation?
So something about the way that the heart is.
Palpitates. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
What? So what? What?
This
led you
makes a
to
bad
say-
turn, doesn't it? It just
Yeah.
this is associative. Chunk. It goes off to the person. I don't know. Philip Wu, you mentioned you liked that name, Philip Wu. He's a real person, and he wanted to be an opera singer, but he worked at the bank. When this came from a prompt, my mentor, Henri Cole, said he wanted us to write a garment poem, so many lines, and to use inarched and shag and something else. So this is what happened. When Philip Wu took us to the Chinese banquet, I wore the dress of fine whale corduroy, plush as the belly of the spaniel you like to say replaced you. You took a Polaroid of Philip and me hugging, inarched. With our black shag caps of hair, we were siblings, happy siblings. He was your friend first. Every Thanksgiving he came bearing pleasures, diamond studs for small Joanna, bouquets for me, Godiva for the table. When dessert was cleared, he'd hop a chair and pour into La Donna e Mobile. He wanted to be known for his singing, not the bank. One holiday, he brought the big-haired blonde he wanted to marry. You called a gold digger. Next time, the girl from Taiwan, nearer his age. He disappeared. I lost the dress. I don't remember if it got a rip or a stain or I gave it to Goodwill. I miss its touch. The darts made me glad. Snaps dancing from the mandarin collar to my boots. The skirt was cut on the bias. It swirled. You left. You said you'd never marry again. You did. That's my James Schuyler poem. I mean, later when I read James Schuyler, I thought, I like that he just says it. So I'll read another father poem that, again, there wasn't any prompt. I just seemed to walk into Philadelphia's, South Philly's corner stores, and sometimes things happen at the corner store. Strawberries alone in an ovoid glass, and each the same squat size and shape. and I thought of hearts suspended. In the syrup, you could see the pinprick pores. He took me to the fields of strawberries, rows of low blooming ovals perched under green. He must have remembered they were my favorite, that they blossomed my birthday month. I remember him in another row calling out to slow down. How often he told me that. Leave some for someone else. Scratch of earth, mess of knees, gobbling bounty under the Florida sun. Mother scolding about the rash. Calamine. A day to ourselves, and nothing of what was said father to daughter to father on the long drive home. But he wasn't a talker that way. You felt the words. Only once in the car. When your time's up, it's up, he said. I must have asked about the war. I was newly married then. We didn't know he was sick. How calm he was, everything deliberate, a soft adagio, except the cancer, the quick year time suspended. I still have this glass with these big, fat, beautiful strawberries in it in my refrigerator. I think I've had them like 7 years now, but they're so beautiful.
And they've lasted?
Yeah, I never opened it up, but
Okay.
just they were the most beautiful strawberries, and they look
Wow.
like hearts.
Wow.
So let's see, how much time I have to hurry this up now.
No, you really don't. You know, one of the poems I really like,
Okay,
and
tell me
because
something to read.
I knew nothing about this tree, because I probably would not find it in Philadelphia, and that's flamboyant, which is,
Oh,
and I really like that you kind of, this is the last poem in the book, and your choice of this, I would like to, ask you why, but could you read that poem?
sure. So this Royal Poinciana was outside my window growing up, and my most favorite tree. And I didn't know till I read Elizabeth Bishop that the other name for Royal Poinciana is flamboyant or flamboyant. So before I knew its name, I knew that it was royal. The Poinciana stretching past the bedroom window, its see-through canopy fluttering a song without the wind, its slender fingers more fern than leaf. A song and not a song. I was a child, what do we know? I went back home to 29th Street, the house that once slept 4 of us, divided for 3 families. The tree was gone. Messy, the woman said. See the petals littering? Sparks, I told her.
Yeah, it's quite a gorgeous tree, and I don't know
It's a
why.
beautiful tree.
Why it's probably indigenous to Florida. I mean,
Yeah,
I
think
haven't
it's in
seen
Hawaii too.
Hawaii too.
But then
'Cause,
that would make sense, right? So I guess I'll do the last dad poem, the title poem, and then maybe something more upper. The Starlight Room. This is
Great.
for Katrina. And Katrina is the half sister I only met twice, lost touch with, and only found her again the month this book came out by serendipity. The Starlight Room. He played the Starlight Room. He sold insurance to the field hands. He took me through the rows of beans and berries, saying, "See how good we have it." He took me over causeways of green water. He took me through the groves of cane and oranges. At the musicians' local, old people waved from folding chairs. He knew them. He talked to everyone. Where did he take you, sister? He took me over causeways of green water. He took me to the fields of strawberries. We met the week he died. I say your name and choke. A child again. It feels like marbles. He took me through the fields and over causeways. Where did he take you, sister? Your mother, the barmaid, our father, the piano player. Looking at your face, my face with better bones, I know before he tells me he loved both mothers. Seahorses make good fathers. One mate forever, eggs in the pouch. I taste your name, oranges for love, papayas for shame. He took me over causeways of green, salty water. Where did he take you?
Well, this has been wonderful. I think you read a very representative sample of your poetry. So what's next? For you, where are you now with your poetry?
I'm so wanting to write more, I guess ekphrastically, I want to write more about music. I think I would always say that I wanted to be a writer more than anything else, or an English teacher. But the older I've gotten, the more I see how music is actually even more important to me. And if I could possibly write about music in a way that would fulfill, I guess, whatever the poet wants to do to speak, but to speak out so that others feel some resonance with it, I'd really like to do that. And so I'm thinking I think I only want to ever write chapbooks.
Okay.
I just am not like a marathon runner, little sprinter. I
Right.
would like to write a chapbook that has more music. And I think since we were talking about jazz, I want Bill Evans in there.
One of my favorites,
Yeah.
for sure.
So that's what I'm hoping. And then maybe I can go to Larry and have him help me
Sure,
publish
sure.
a chapbook on.
Myself, I think chapbooks are great. Maybe because you could read a chapbook and just sit down in one reading, and then I think one of the lovely things, you can turn around and reread it the next day.
And it feels like it, and it does have this kind of motion that you can, like you said, you can do it in an afternoon, and then you can go back to it a few days later.
Right.
And I think, the public library, the main library, they're having shelves now just for chapbooks.
Oh,
Or maybe it
didn't know
hasn't happened yet, but the woman who was in charge there told us at a reading last year, because, they do get lost,
yeah, right.
they get lost. But I
Well,
thank you so much,
Yeah.
Charles.
Oh,
And I
you're
have
welcome.
so enjoyed your work, and I can't believe that we both started in Leonard's workshop when
Yeah.
we were 60.
Yeah, exactly. We've
Yeah.
come a long way. But this has really been delightful, and that we've met up again. You have your debut book here with Philly Loves Poetry.
Very, very late blooming. Huh?
Yeah, no, that's really great that you did it. So I have to say, as I conclude programs, of course, many, many thanks to our production person behind the camera, and that's Alice Pearson. You always do this great, Alice. You make it so easy for us, to do. So I thank you, and I thank Philly Cam for keeping us on. This is our 10th year,
And
of
Larry?
doing this, and Larry too. We don't do any of this without Larry. And once again, I have to give a support for the Moonstone Arts Center and what Larry has done. He is truly a cultural treasure of Philadelphia, and all that he's done. We think of the readings, we think of Philly Loves Poetry. He sponsors over 100 readings, and that represents maybe about 300 poets, maybe more when you consider all the open mics that he has. And he's a publisher. Published probably close to 100 books already. So thank you, Larry, and
Larry.
find a way to, support us. And so I hope to see you again next month, and thank you for watching.
Thank you so much, Charles. But I really do think we need to interview you. Oh. Oof. Yeah, I thought that. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad it's over though. This is amazing. I Schumann poem.
Ah,
It's called The Pianist Speaks. And actually, in
Oh,
that,
yeah.
that's a funny thing. You know, you were talking about Dichterliebe. So
Huh?
that's